I'm Teisha Bader with Shalom TV's News Update. The Palestinian bid for upgraded status at the United Nations to non-member statehood has passed. The vote passed overwhelmingly, 138 in favor, 9 against, with 41 countries abstaining. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon stated after the vote that the Palestinians have a right to their own state, side by side with a secure state of Israel. He said there is no substitute for negotiations and that the vote today underscores the urgency to restart peace talks. U.S. Ambassador to the UN Susan Rice stated that real peace can only be achieved through direct negotiations. She called the UN resolution, quote, unfortunate and counterproductive, calling on both parties to resume direct talks without preconditions as soon as possible. Rice said the U.S. would continue to reject any unilateral action and any efforts to delegitimize Israel. She said that the resolution does not establish that Palestine is a state. Prior to the UN vote, U.S. senators from both sides of the aisle proposed amendments cutting U.S. aid to the Palestinian Authority and to the UN for granting the Palestinians non-member status. The bipartisan amendment proposes to cut aid to the Palestinians should they bring a case against Israel before the International Criminal Court, which the upgrade in status enables them to do. The amendment also says that unwillingness to conduct, quote, meaningful negotiations with Israel would result in the immediate closing of the Palestinian Liberation Organization's office in Washington. The amendment was filed by Republican South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming, Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer of New York, and Democratic Senator Robert Menendez of New Jersey. The JTA reports that 2 other amendments were filed by Republican senators, introduced by Barrasso, along with Senator Mike Lee from Utah and James Inhofe from Oklahoma, that would cut assistance to the Palestinians by 50% and U.S. fees to the United Nations by the same amount. It also proposes to cut U.S. aid to any country that voted to approve the UN bid by 20%. A separate amendment to the same bill, also from Republican senators, proposes to cut off U.S. aid to the Palestinians altogether. And turning to Israel now, Ynet reports that the entrance to Ma'ale Adumim was blocked after Israeli guards arrested a Palestinian at the checkpoint there who told them he was going to carry out a terrorist attack in the West Bank city, which is just north of Jerusalem. A 40-year-old Palestinian from Nablus arrived at the Ma'ale Adumim checkpoint in a vehicle with no license plate. He told the guards he was going to carry out a terrorist attack because of a personal dispute. The man was arrested and an investigation is underway. While American Jewish contractor Alan Gross remains jailed, his family and attorney responded to a statement from Cuba claiming that Gross does not have cancer and is in overall good health, as we reported to you Wednesday. While Gross's family expressed hope that the medical report, including biopsy results from Cuba, were right, they also restated their plea that Gross be examined by an independent American physician of their own choosing. The biopsy in Cuba was performed by Rabbi Eli Abadi, a U.S. physician whom the Cubans allowed to examine Gross. Gross's radiologist Alan Cohen of Maryland said that the biopsy result was, quote, hopeful but not definitive because of the small sample size obtained by Abadi. The biopsy was taken of a lump behind Gross's right shoulder. Meanwhile, Richard Stone and Malcolm Hoenlein of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations expressed their deep disappointment that Cuban officials failed once again to allow the release of Gross, who has now been held in Cuba for 3 years, saying it is time for the Cuban government to demonstrate compassion and release Mr. Gross so that he can receive a complete medical examination by American doctors with the proper expertise, noting that the doctor allowed by Cuba to examine Gross is not an oncologist. Several U.S. senators also expressed their disappointment that Gross has not yet been released. U.S. Senators Ben Cardin of Maryland and Jerry Moran of Kansas said, "Our commitment to Alan's cause is undiminished, and we will continue to work to ensure his immediate and unconditional release." Gross was sentenced to 15 years in prison in Cuba for bringing satellite phones and computer equipment to the Jewish community there. And finally today, the Washington Post reports that the U.S. will supervise construction of a $100 million five-story underground facility for an IDF complex to be built at an Israeli Air Force base in the Tel Aviv area. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers will be responsible for supervising the construction of the facility, which will be under very tight security measures. According to the Post, the complex is being called Site 911, and only U.S. contractors will be allowed to bid on the construction contract. And that's Shalom TV's news update. I'm Teisha Bader.